G'day everyone and welcome to this week's episode with Kerryn Fewster. She is a change expert. And before you go, I don't need to know anything about change. Well, I know you've been through COVID and we're on the other side of it and you're like, whew, geez, I feel like we're normalizing some stuff now. But the reality is you are always leading and only ever going to continue to lead in uncertain environments, greater levels of uncertainty. And sometimes it's not just crisis oriented, or sometimes it is a crisis like COVID, but it could be a million other things. And as you're leveling up your leadership, you need some techniques and some strategies and some thoughts in your mind before you get to crisis, not when you get to crisis, about how you're going to help to really dig down and build the best possible culture during that period and help your people navigate with you that uncertain environment. So if you've got any changes coming up with your business model, I don't know, maybe generative AI is disrupting your business or could augment it. Maybe you've got a whole bunch of people for whatever reason in your industry, there's some big headwinds coming and people are starting to get nervous. This is a time to step up. This is the time to think about your leadership, how you communicate, how you talk to your people, how you build culture during that time so you don't just survive it, you actually thrive, you turn it into an opportunity and you can build the best culture you've ever had as a result of navigating this very well. So that's what today is all about. I really hope you enjoy today's episode with Kerryn Fewster. Welcome to the Scale HQ podcast, your weekly injection of tips and insights into the secrets of scaling. I'm your host, Sean Steele, and I am obsessed with figuring out how to help founders just like you who are creating real value in the world to scale up so they can fulfill their potential. I do that each week by interviewing founders who successfully scaled, experts in all the areas of business that you need to master, interviews with founders who are still on the way up, and 10-minute tutorials and reflections from me based on my experiences in creating $100 million in revenue for 4 other companies over 8 years. So let's dive in and see what gems we can find together on this week's episode of the Scale HQ podcast. Well, welcome back to our regular listeners and to anyone joining us for the first time. We are thrilled to have you. My guest this week is Kerryn Fewster, founder and director of Change 2020, organizational change and people and culture consultancy, established 18 years ago. Is that right, Kerryn?
That's right. I know we had our 18th birthday this year. I couldn't believe it myself.
Wow. That's amazing. That's the age of my son. So yeah, I know how long a period that feels like. And so you guys, you partner with founders and CEOs and their leadership teams, providing expertise, advice, and support around change and transformation, leadership, culture, and M&A. Mostly, I'm sure you do many other things, given the breadth of what that actually means. Is that a fair sort of high-level summary?
Yeah, that's a pretty good summary. Absolutely.
Beautiful. Well, Kerryn, it's great to have you here today. For those of you who are listening and heard episode 84 with John Knight, founder of Business Depot, I asked John who he knew after our interview that specialized in how to build high-performing cultures when what's ahead of you feels really sort of uncertain. And he mentioned you. And so that was really the context for our chat today. We've got this rate of change that's increasing, which I don't know if it always really feels like that because it's, you only have the context of yesterday. But for those of us who've been around a little while longer, maybe the rate of change feels like it's faster, the level of uncertainty feels like it's increasing. And in that environment, not only do you have to engage people at a hearts and minds level to come on that journey of sort of uncertainty with you as it folds, but I'm curious as to how you think about helping leaders elevate their cultures into one that's actually high performing, and flipping the challenge to an opportunity so they're not kind of surviving uncertainty, waiting for it to go away with their head in the sand, if you like, and just trying to hunker down and stay safe, but actually finding a way to rally the best of people to help them, I guess, co-navigate it. So that's really what, today's all about. Are you happy with that as a kind of focus for us today?
That sounds good. I'm keen to hear your questions and chat about that because obviously, as you rightly say, that is the area that we operate in on a daily basis. So lots of learnings, lots of insights.
Well, Kerryn, what led you to, that's almost 20 years now, what led you to kind of dedicating your professional career to working on these kinds of problems?
Yeah, so I thought that I really liked human resources work, and I found out that not only did I not really enjoy it, I really wasn't very good at it because it's really lots of rules, lots of structure, lots of policy, lots of process. And whilst I think that's all important, one of my major challenges with that was that just because you issue a policy or tell somebody we're doing it this way, it doesn't mean we do it. It doesn't mean we like it. And so often we're not even consulting or asking the people who are impacted by it. So when I started out in change, I don't even think or recall there being a title of change manager, or we knew about stakeholder engagement, we knew about communication, but the idea of really specializing in change was relatively new. Gosh, that makes me sound ancient, doesn't it? But it was relatively new as a concept. And so we were involved, and I say we because I was originally when I founded Change 2020 with three other directors at the time,
Mhm.
and one exited relatively rapidly when he worked out that being a founder of a new business resulted in zero income essentially. So you couldn't take
Wasn't
a
ready for
full
the
time
risk.
contract and
Yeah.
also help build a business. That didn't work that way. Our second director, he exited after about 7 years. He just different choices and moved interstate. And then my third exited probably about the 10-year mark when, it was probably at the back of the GFC, and again, it just changes, and it was a little bit too, it was just time. And so when we founded that organisation, we were originally working with some very, very big infrastructure projects or energy projects, and they needed to engage the people. So that's how we kind of kicked off the idea of working closer with engaging the people and bring them along on this change event, journey, disaster, whatever it might have been. And from there, it's really evolved much more into that working with the leaders and the executive teams now to optimize their performance and their cultures in this environment.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it certainly has feels like it's really grown up as a profession, if you like. And as you said, and I'm very much of the um, I've had the opportunity to work with some really incredible people leaders who absolutely had a big disdain for actually just the sort of the old model of HR, where it was really just a kind of service model, as you said, like very policy and process and reactive, as opposed to actually like a strategic part of the business with the right seat at the table to help shape the future of an
Sure.
organization, and actually with a big responsibility for shaping what performance looks like and what success looks like, and so on. Can you maybe share, just to give us, given this kind of topic around uncertainty, can you give me a sense of maybe a story from your past, a client that you've worked with or a company that you think's done a great job in successfully navigating like a really challenging period of uncertainty and drawing out like what some of the key steps were that helped them, build or maintain a high performing culture during a really difficult period of uncertainty?
Yeah, sure. And there's multiple clients that come to mind. And even though we feel like we're through the crisis of the pandemic, it still has roll on impacts from there. And so it's useful just to be able to call on the response time and what people did during that particular period. But one client does come to mind in the finance sector, and they're sort of well, they're, in terms of FTEs, they're probably around 200 to 300, so not an enormous organisation. But like the rest of the world, were very decisive, very, very rapidly.
Yeah,
They weren't sitting around waiting for what's going to be the next way we're going to next wave of information. Instead, they decided to be quite proactive and take the lead. I think what they did do really particularly well was they engaged people as the person. So, for example, which part of Brisbane do you live in? So we can make sure we create a little hub of contact for you there. In perhaps when we can go for walks together and things like that. So they were very big on the connection element. So they found out about where do you live, what's going to be your environment when you're working from a home location. They ensure that those that they thought may not have that it may not be as feasible to work from home, whether they've got half a dozen kids under the age of 8 or something, and they're juggling everything, and they reset expectations around what good was going to look like for their organisation and that performance for
yeah,
not forever, but for a finite period of time. They were quite explicit about that. They also they doubled down, tripled down on communication. So the CEO was doing blogs. We had, and I say we because we were working alongside with them. We would continually have short videos on, resilience, how to set up your home office. Here's a fact sheet on, what sunshine does for you if you can get outside. Little things like that, and they do seem very little, but I think, Sean, that it demonstrated connection and care the whole way
mm,
through. And so they were able to make sure that the people who, they would typically engage with on a day-to-day basis, through the office environment, that to the best of their ability, they continue to connect with them. So they make quick decisions. They reset standards of productivity just because it was such a foreign environment and we didn't know what good was going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
They absolutely, to the point of the danger of over communication, which I think is a fallacy. I don't think you can possibly over communicate. The connection of people in their local environments, I think, was a really important one as well. And the other thing I would say that the leadership team came out and said, we're not sure either. I kind
Mm-hmm.
of don't know about, I mean, who did know? And so being able to be really open and honest around the fact that we were in such an uncertain place and everyone was learning, but somehow we're going to get through this, I think was really quite critical from that perspective.
Mm. Yeah, the vulnerability really builds trust, doesn't it? And so, do you feel like that was already a culture that they had? And like, did they have a close and connective culture? And these were things that helped to maintain that in a period of uncertainty where people were really being affected by an uncertain period? Or do you feel like it was some of that care maybe wasn't there or wasn't as present, and actually this built culture actually improved it during the
Mm.
period? Like, what's your perspective on that?
It's the latter. And,
Okay.
I really like that question because they're as I said, they're in the finance sector, so the fallout from the Finance and Banking Royal Commission, which every lid was being lifted up in terms of performance in that particular
Mhm.
industry pre the pandemic. And it's a highly competitive industry. There was pressure, there was stress, there were very very long hours. There were quite a few challenges, and the culture was certainly not broken, but in terms of that care and connectivity, because we've been working alongside them for a little while, it was nowhere near as evident as at that absolute height of uncertainty in those from the March 2020 through to, probably here in Queensland, where I know we were somewhat more blessed than other parts of Australia and the world. But, for those first 2 to 3 months, I would say that, we tested it through pulse surveys, the engagement level was extraordinary because
Yeah.
people were so grateful to be
Mm.
recognised as that individual. Or, you now know that I live in,
Yeah.
Barton, for example, and I've got 4 kids and I can't do this with the school run and etc.
Mm.
And that level of openness as well
Mm.
had it wasn't even necessarily part of the conversation unless that was like your close friendship circle
Yeah.
at work. But suddenly it became an important insight to make sure that people were okay. So
Yeah.
I would say that it actually improved the culture.
Mm. And so, what about now? And it's obviously, of course, dangerous to say like we're on the other side of COVID. Like, who the hell knows, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is, it's not front page of the news every day. People aren't scared for their lives anymore. Like a lot of things are normalized, and there's a new normal that's obviously still kind of evolving, but is happening. Are those? Do you think they've been able to retain that level of connectiveness? Like, that work that they did sounds like it's really helped them transition through a really high period of uncertainty and create the best possible culture they could in an uncertain environment. What I hear in that is a deep level of care, a deep level of personalized thoughtfulness, and a really honest and vulnerable approach as leaders, which doesn't mean you're crying on the phone to them every day, but kind of saying, hey, we haven't dealt with this before, we'll do it together, and we'll have to figure it out together, like that sort of collective nature. What about now? So let's assume that we're maybe a couple of years on the other side of that. Have they been able to retain that? Did it give them a platform where they've been able to build let's call it a high performing culture as opposed to just a connected culture? Because I don't know how strong is the link between that and what you consider the elements of a high performing culture, if that makes sense. Like, what's
Mm.
happened since talking about that?
Look, I would say there's elements of it. What I would say at the employee base, that closeness and connection and care is still really quite strong.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, and it's certainly not only this client I'm referring to, but you look at the moment where CEOs are directing people back 5 days a week, and
Mm.
these organisations have got not exactly the same mindset, but awfully similar. And that in itself is, I'm so curious about watching how this unfolds.
Mm.
So I have my own personal view about whether that's the right thing or a challenging thing
Can you
to
please
do.
share that, Kerryn? Because I mean, it is a
Sure.
conversation that I have every week with different founders and in our communities, because this it seems like the people who've gone, like, if I just draw out a couple of my observations from that period
Yeah.
where everyone was sort of forced to go fully remote, and most people have gone back to some kind of a hybrid model or stayed fully remote. There's probably not as many that have gone all the way back to a full face-to-face model, but let's stay with when everyone was forced to go remote. At that point in time, the vast majority of people already had those people in place who already had connections with other team members, who already had some sense of, bond, unity, and whatever. And what I noticed was many people found it very difficult to bring on board new team members in a remote-only workforce. And the people who, it seems like the people who really doubled down and went, we're going remote only, this is never coming back, we're never bringing you back to the office, and we're therefore going to master what it takes to build culture with full remote, seem to be carrying on and doing pretty well in doing so. Clearly not all of them, but many. And the ones who've maybe had a model where it was really difficult to be hybrid or remote have kind of rushed back to face-to-face, and whether it's totally face-to-face, probably finding it a little bit easier to manage. But hybrid, this sort of massive continuum of what does actually hybrid kind of mean and how do we make it work, seems to be so difficult because it's so hard to please everybody. You're trying to find the right balance for what do my customers need, what do my people need, what do they want, how do I make that shift? What do you think? There's probably no ideal model because I assume it sort of suits the business. But what are your perspectives on what works in that, what seems to be working, what you think will sort of happen in the future? How do people succeed in navigating this new hybrid model?
Sure. It's hard, isn't it? Look, firstly, I don't think that the role of any leader is to please everybody. That's the no-win game. So firstly, park that, because you won't succeed and you'll be destined to fail and feel poorly about yourself. So don't worry about that one. For me, it's 2023, and I believe that we are just going to continue to see, not necessarily, and hopefully not a pandemic, but look what our world hasn't. It's not settling. It doesn't settle down in any way, shape, or form. We're still recovering, like those who are in this supply chain industry. They're still in times of trying to recover from obviously the lack of the challenge with importing and exporting, etc. Obviously the turbulence globally has a significant impact because we're a small world now, and I think that the idea of saying we are either all in or all out or only hybrid is problematic, because there's talent everywhere, there's impacts everywhere, there's opportunities everywhere. And when I say everywhere, I'm talking globally. There are so many fabulous stories of organisations who are paying the most crazy amount of rent to have a beautiful office and maybe a river or an ocean view or a mountain view. However, you only could really attract the people within your maybe 30K radius. For me, that's just mind-blowing. Like in my small organisation, we have a team member based down on Sorrento, down Victoria. She worked with us for 2 years before I physically met her. And now she's been with us for 3.5 years. I think I've met her face-to-face 3 times, which works for everyone. I'd love to see her more. But what I'm saying is that should not be a barrier. So I think the organisations that are ordering back, that for me, I think will not serve them well into the long term. Having said that, I'm an absolute advocate for connection. We're so much better when we know where we belong somewhere, and human connection is imperative. So I think it's really important that leaders are looking for how am I bringing my people together. Face-to-face is absolutely ideal, but when we can't do that, how are we having this sort of conversation where I really do feel like I'm being valued, where I'm being listened to, where I can have a tough conversation, where you can call me out on my performance, where we can have the feedback. I think unless we learn that skill and learn to get comfortable with it, we're probably going to miss out on massive opportunity, because there is no way that all the talent for your organisation sits within your 30K radius of where your office is.
Yeah.
And there's great opportunity to be gained from actually saying that our whole approach to work is to find talent where the talent is and make that work for us.
Yeah.
It's a new way of leading, and it's a tricky way to lead because that's not how we've grown up. But at the same time, if you think about a leader now who, just as a side story, interestingly, we've been in a research project with Queensland University of Technology for about 5 or 6 years now into why some people can tolerate ambiguity more readily in a workplace than others. So we started that research before the pandemic, but the data tells us that those who are most tolerant of ambiguity in terms of generations, people think it's the millennials, it's actually the baby boomers. And the reason for that, if you think about when a baby boomer started work,
Mm.
when that might have been, I guess I'm thinking maybe the 70s, then, they started with a briefcase, probably a pocket protector and a pen and a little
Mhm.
notebook. And when they retired, or if they're, on the fringe of retirement, if they're retiring with devices, one on their wrist, one in their pocket, their laptops at home, and they've gone from centralization, decentralization, in terms of all the structures,
Mhm.
self-led teams,
Mm.
everything that you could think of that they've gone through. So we adapt much more readily than we think we do. Now, we
Mm.
are creatures of habit, so we do like it and say, I am the leader. I can see my people in their office. I know where they are, and I know how to contact them. That's easier, and that's how we've been brought up.
Yeah.
And we are creatures of habit, but absolutely we can adapt and change. We're quite amazing at it, actually,
Mm.
but our minds don't remind us of that very often because we are more comfortable doing what we've always known.
It's definitely not an easy one to navigate. But one of the things that I draw out of what you said is this sort of obligation for leaders to remember that people are human and they're tribal and they need to feel connected to stuff. So whether they're sitting beside you in the office, and yes, there's a whole bunch of things that you miss out on, that the sort of almost learning by osmosis. You're hearing other people over the phone in a conversation they're having, and then it follows on somewhere else, and so on. And so whilst we don't have a fully functioning metaverse, or where those things can still happen, in a new virtual model, yes, we might lose some of those things. But on the flip side, I think if you can, you just have to work a lot harder, don't you, to figure out how to ensure that people remain connected. All the other principles still remain the same. People need to feel connected. They need to enjoy their work. They have to be clear about what success looks like. They have to feel like they're enabled and empowered to achieve success. They need to have some level of autonomy and agency over how they get things done, and so on and so on. Like, I don't think those things have changed, but it adds a new layer of complexity for organizations to figure out. Can I switch tack, Kerryn? I'm interested in your perspective if we kind of switch out of uncertainty into the context of high performing culture. Um, I'm assuming that's something that you work on with your clients. Do you have a framework for that? Do you have steps for that? Like, what are the kind of key ingredients where you go, these are the 5 or the 7 or the 8 things that you think are the most important ingredients to actually build not just a, and I want to preface this because I've seen cultures that feel great, at least for a period of time, like have, everybody feels very cared for and there's lots of love, and, we love you, and, everything's going to be fine and we look after you and
Yeah.
all the rest. But actually, there's no context of performance. People are not held to account. People are not clear about what success looks like for the organization, for themselves. They don't get to feel, they be proud of their work, because it's not about that. It's about feeling cared for. It's not actually about performing and feeling the pride that comes with actually being part of a high performing team or culture. So, what are the things that you think that make up a high performing culture?
I love that question. I feel immersed in that space at the moment. Fundamentally, and without doubt, and every single day, it must start with trust and vulnerability based trust, not just I trust that you are going to turn up to that meeting on time,
Mm.
but I trust that you're going to put your hand up early when you say I'm stuck or I don't know the answer, or I don't. I'm worried I won't be able to deliver. So it's that real trust where I don't feel there'll be such a severe consequence if I fail, or if the my commitment I made I was not able to meet it, and I've got a reason for it. So it must start with trust. But you're mentioning around, you've said caring, loving, kind cultures, but necessarily are we clear on what the outcome is? And more recently, I've been working with a couple of different businesses where there's an abundance of love and kindness. And one in particular, I've started to help them realize that their politeness is actually a disease
Mm.
because they're not having robust conversations.
Mm.
They're having safe conversations, and they're trying to hint and maybe, and have you thought about, like, really
Give
gentle.
clues and infer.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear my hint?
Yeah.
Um, but empathy, kindness, love, that is not an opposite to productivity, outcome, results. Absolutely not. In actual fact, they go hand in glove. I talk to leaders about, what is your responsibility? Particularly if they're a parent, it's easy to be able to draw them to say, when your 16 or 17-year-old is probably with a crowd that you're not sure is going to be okay, or they start to want to go out and drive in a car or whatever it might be, generally speaking, hopefully, your response to you cannot, or here's your guidelines, or this is how it's really going to work in our family, comes from a position of love, care, and kindness.
Mm.
But the outcome is that they're very clear on what is okay and what is not okay, what the results are expected from this outing. And so it's quite easy to flip that because they will do that every single time.
Mm.
So what is it then that's preventing you from having the conversation with your peers if you love them and if you're caring and you're kind? It's because it's uncomfortable for us. So for as long as we prioritize our comfort to say, I just really don't want to have that difficult conversation, I think that's a disservice, particularly as the leader.
Mm.
You can provide tough feedback, constructive feedback. Conflict we know is necessary in an organisation to get a better outcome. Otherwise, we're going to be passive and hopeful. And particularly, like if you're a founder, that's maybe going to get you to a place of niceness, but is that going to get you maybe to where your ambition is? And the likelihood of that is no. So
Mm.
I think that in the high performance teams, the foundation must be trust. Then there's got to be a preparedness to have the tough conversations. I would also put in there, and we do work in this space, that ability to adapt. You must be able to adapt. Don't be too wedded to your plan, because the world is not going to be tolerant of you being too wedded to your plan. You have to be able to move in that space. So,
Mhm.
that preparedness to adapt and it really embrace the uncertainty. Obviously, communication, you just can't get that one wrong, and you must, as I said earlier, double down on that. The accountability you've mentioned. So more recently, we've been really focusing on helping organisations understand, and it's not new, but it slips, that difference between accountability and responsibility, and that if you are accountable, your role is to ensure that that task, that project is delivered. Now, if the people below you have not delivered that, and I'm the CEO, I'm coming to you because you're the accountable person. So, and I'm not going to encourage you to look and blame and point fingers at your team members. I'm only talking to you about it because you're the accountable person. So, what have you been doing to build that, the capability below you, or the clarity around expectations, etc.?
Mm.
And I think that the whole area of blame needs to be almost, let's leave that in the playground. It's where adults here, take some responsibility, be the accountable person, have that difficult conversation. And look, I'm not saying it's easy, absolutely not.
Mm.
But they're not inversely related. Output and productivity is not a disconnect from love, kindness, care, compassion,
Yeah.
tolerance at all. In actual fact, I think in the modern world that they are a necessary partnership.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. And one of the things I'm really reflecting on whilst you're talking about that is the conversation that I had with Amy from Radical Candor, and we unpacked
Mm.
that framework and just that beautiful simple diagram for leaders to use to go, this is actually the perfect blend between caring deeply and challenging directly. Like, you can do both at the same time. It's not one or the other, as you said. It's actually
Mm.
about doing both, in the same reason that with my sort of chief people officer in the last several companies and all the subsidiaries that we had, we always called our sort of HR function, if you want to put it in inverted commas, and I'm doing air quotes because I never have called our function HR. It's always been called people and performance,
Yeah.
to ensure that people get the context that, like, performance is okay, performance is to be expected. Actually, that's the kind of environment everybody wants to be in. And what you lose good people over is by allowing these sort of just niceties and like poor performance from people. That absolutely pisses off high
Yeah.
performers like nothing else. If they're looking around going, I'm carrying people here, and they're not having their sort of failings addressed in any way, no one's being held to account, that's not a place I want to be. People want to feel proud of what they want to do. Then therefore they've
Yes,
got to be in an environment that does perform, and therefore you do have to have those things in place. Okay.
most definitely.
Sometimes if we so we think it's so, and one of the other things I would reflect on in what you said is that in a period of uncertainty, all of those things can still be possible. So you might be redefining what success looks like, and actually maybe having to redefine it a bit more regularly. You mentioned the ability to adapt, and so for example, we always, with all of our Scale HQ clients, we always set 3-year strategy, but it's reviewed every year because the world changes, and you only set sort of 90-day plans as your execution rhythm because the world changes, and so you have to be willing to adapt. But so what I'm hearing from you is actually, in a period of uncertainty, that becomes even more. So it's about, as you're adapting, you might be resetting what success looks like, recognizing that you may have to do that again, and that's okay. It's actually about having clarity for now, like as much clarity as we can create for now on what success looks like now, so people can feel successful, even if it changes, even if the environment changes. That's okay. That's also to be expected. It's not a failing of leadership not to be able to have a crystal ball and know exactly what's going to happen and chart a way through it. It's actually about the ability to rally people as you chart your way through it.
Oh, most certainly. I mean, so much of that is so right. If you're a leader who thinks you've got a crystal ball, you're kidding yourself. That's not the case, and you're not demonstrating that you're a real human who goes, "I'm not sure either." And you mentioned the word clarity. Our almost like a motto is provide clarity over certainty. People want certainty; they crave it. Our brains crave it. There are so few things that you and I are certain about, other than, ideally the sun coming up and going down each day.
Mm,
There is, and I ask people this question, and it's around that focus on what's in your control, because they want, give me the answer, tell me what's going to happen.
mm,
It's like, you tell me what's going to happen. Where you tell me absolutely what does the next 3 months look like, and I don't do that to be, well, I guess I do it to challenge their thinking,
mm,
because when their expectation is that a leader has that crystal ball, I can tell you absolutely, it's unfair and it's unreasonable.
mm,
And at the same time, we have to from a cultural perspective, we need to make sure that we're building that level of, and it is a skill. Like, how do I sit in this level of discomfort without, wanting to throw my toys out of the cot?
mm,
How can I equip myself? How do I keep myself informed? Am I being curious, or am I just waiting to be fed information and all the answers? That as we move forward, for me, it's a fundamental skill set. Whether you are a fitter and turner, or a nurse, or a CEO of a large organisation, if you cannot be prepared to adapt and find your own way to get some comfort for yourself. And that will be through asking great questions. So, general level of curiosity, being brave enough to say, I don't know yet, or move into another area in a workplace to try and learn more. That whole concept of learning is, if you're not learning something new each week, then, and I mean that genuinely, that would concern me.
mm,
And I don't mean that it has to be through, obviously, a degree or anything from a tertiary perspective. But if you haven't got that level of curiosity to ask, well, what if? Could we do it this way? Have we thought about? And I mean that every employee at every level can have that capacity, because we definitely know the leaders are not the owners of all great ideas.
mhm,
It doesn't flow up that way. And so I think, and I know I'm sort of jumping around, but if I come back to that high performance culture, having an organisation where every level, every role just has a bit of a mindset about, I don't have certainty. What do I need to be clear about? How will I gather that clarity for myself? For
mm,
some people, it might be a week. And also, how do I get myself comfortable with the fact that we don't have certainty? What might I be able to do? How can I alter my way of thinking? Because with the research that we have completed with, well, are still working with, an ongoing partnership, but one of the main outcomes in terms of building your tolerance with discomfort, and ambiguity, is they're all human skills. They're
mm,
around mindfulness, creativity, courageousness, curiosity, assertiveness. There's focus, which is certainly those short-term plans, but but it certainly wasn't develop more Gantt charts.
Mm.
That's not going to be the
Mm.
solution moving forward. So building those
The
very
Gantt chart will
human
be wrong in
skills.
about 7 days, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
It feels
Exactly.
like
So building the
yeah,
human skills is critical.
well, it feels like there's, humans need, what's interesting is, that humans need, uncertainty as much as they need certainty. We, actually need and crave both. Like, we don't love just routine, boring things never change. Like, we actually do need some uncertainty in our environments. There's almost a bit of a reframe there to go, actually, this is great because we know there's going to be growth opportunities, it's going to require our creativity. But if people only have uncertainty, then not everybody handles that super
Mm,
well. So, I guess there's an opportunity there to create certainty on the things that we can control, or the things that we can focus on that we know in the absence of whatever changes, they make sense for right now. And so
mm,
that's a place where we can focus, knowing that actually the environment could change around us very rapidly. Like, I imagine, let's take an example. If you're running a copywriting business and ChatGPT came
mm.
along and all of a sudden in 7 days you're going, geez, we could be, all of your team are going, I think we could all be replaced in the next, 3 months. If you had a client who came to you with that problem in that kind of environment where there was like a really clear technological disruption, people could be, and in reality could be out of jobs. Like, it's not
Yeah.
just a
Mm.
sort of uh, a, an assumption without any potential evidence. Like, it could be a reality. What are the first couple of steps that you encourage leaders to take when they realize there's some real uncertainty? It's probably valid for lots of different reasons, whatever it is. There's a regulation change or a compliance problem, or who knows, whatever the problem is. How do you encourage people to think about the first steps they take when all of a
Mm.
sudden they've got a whole bunch of people in their business who are very uncertain and nervous?
Sure. So I guess there's a few things. This might sound quite simplistic, but the very first thing I'll encourage people to do is stop and take a deep breath and just calm themselves as much as they possibly can. As the leader, to equip yourself with as much information as you can get your hands on immediately. Anything that's happening in your industry that's demonstrating how rapidly this disruption's coming along, and to create a narrative really rapidly about what might this mean for us. So not what it does mean, what it might mean for us. Communicate, get out in front of it as soon as you possibly can. This is what we do know. This is what we don't know. This is what we think might happen. And this is when I'll let you know when we have a bit more information. So,
Mm.
most certainly, get the information you can, get on your front foot, and don't ever go out to try and say, it's okay, we've got this.
Yeah.
Like,
Worry
no
about
one saw
the
ChatGPT coming at this pace that it's come at. I mean, it's quite extraordinary.
mm.
The other thing that we do, and I know it's a 30-plus-year-old term now, VUCA, but it's just so relevant. So so you take a copywriting business, so they won't be the only one who are going, oh wow,
Just for
what
those
does
people who
this look
haven't
like?
heard VUCA, can you just explain what the acronym means?
Sure. So VUCA is for V for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, and it was born out of from a war back in the Middle East in the 80s or 90s, and it was because the enemy was creating such chaos for the US military because they weren't marching forward and behaving in the way that war typically had been battled. So they were, using lots of different techniques and tactics and continually outsmarting what was, centuries of proven warfare. Now I know it's
Mm.
not a very positive conversation,
Mm.
but that term, VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, was born out of there because they didn't know how to respond to it. So if you look at ChatGPT that throws organisations, and not just copyright, like we works in tertiary,
Mhm.
that legal, there's so many
Yeah.
areas at the moment that are just going, goodness gracious. And it's essentially, what's it been, 6 or 7 months since it's
Mm.
really come about? So what we would often do with organisations and do, we go, let's have a look at what VUCA means in this industry. How about if we flip all of that? What's the positive? If everyone else is reeling from the volatility, where's the possibility for us in this place? Because if they're all trying to bunker down and secure their clients and say, oh, that's no good, we're much better at our copywriting than ChatGPT could ever be, and we've got this personal relationship. The reality is that that might be a short-term solution, but it's probably not the forever solution. But if you were to flip over all the elements of VUCA and look, where is the opportunity in the volatility in the market for us? How
Mm.
might we be able to steer ourselves this way? How could we reposition our service offering or our connection with our clients and our employees? When we look at the uncertainty, how do we make that uncertainty, that sense of chaos? How do we be the first to respond? How do we go faster? Because we know everyone else is probably still reeling from it. With the complexity is a wonderful place for opportunity. It's well hidden. You've got to really be able to sit with it. But knowing that others might be getting caught up in knots around all the challenges associated with it, what's clear for you in this space if you were to be the first to market, or if you to alter your offering, slightly to the left
Mm.
because that looks clear for you, and the ambiguity is as rapidly as possible trying to find where can we cope with all of this, all of the unknowns, what is known in the unknown,
Yeah.
and move towards what are we going to control. So turning that over into an opportunistic mindset as opposed to a fear, dread, and
Mm.
exhaustion mindset.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, sure. Like I see people's faces light up with it. We often use that sort of technique in a workshop, or working one on one with leaders, and just say, just take a moment, and it does take a moment. Flip over.
Mm.
What if? And start with that. Imagine if.
Mm.
How about? Some sort of opening style
Mm.
question, and you'll literally see their minds wandering, because you can see their eyes wandering around
Yeah.
going, well, maybe.
Mm.
And it just helps, because a positive mindset is a much easier way to see the future than negative and being frightened, because then we
Yeah.
shut down and we close down.
And I think that's absolutely bang on, and it reminds me of a couple of clients that I've got that have just had major courage and taken the right approach of going, well, actually, I think my entire business model could get disrupted here. So now I can either sort of fight tooth and nail to sort of like somehow dig the business model into a strong defensive position and hope that it doesn't end up disrupting me, or I can see an entirely new business model if I put my founder hat back on in the way when I started this company and go, hang on, there's a new business opportunity here. This is what other people are probably going to be doing. Maybe I need to get into that business. So at least I'm learning about whether I'm going to compete, whether I'm going to have to completely change my business model, or whether it's going to be an adjunct. Maybe my business model will die and maybe it will be reinvented. Well, you can either be one of the people who disrupts your own model, or you can wait to be disrupted and watch a slow and failing death. Like, you can't be afraid of tackling whatever that is. And you always get nervous, of course, because you immediately think of all the responsibility and all the salaries and all the families and everything to be affected by it. But the reality is you've got to be able to move with that information and find your way through that. And I always think what you can never promise people, as you said, is that it's going to be all right. You can't promise people what's going to happen, and you can't promise people what decisions you're going to have to make to ensure that you can protect the business and as many people in the business as possible. But what you can promise them is that you'll be transparent, and as soon as you've made decisions, that you'll communicate those decisions, and then you'll always give people adult information so they can make good decisions for themselves, for their own families and their own futures. And you can always promise that as long as you honor it. And I think people really respect that. I've had to take many companies through numerous very difficult periods where there's lots of redundancies and so on. We just had to pull back costs because lots of things had changed. But they always really appreciate knowing that you'll just get transparent information from us, and it may not be information that you love, but you'll get to decide what to do with that information. We'll tell you what your options are, and we will always try to protect. Our number one job is to make sure this business survives. Like, that's number one priority.
Yeah.
And so, we'll honor that in the way that we communicate with you.
Most definitely. It's not easy, but I don't think you have a choice. And that is the courage.
Yeah. Your alternative is to put your head in the sand, hope it goes away, and you'll just start losing people, and your business becomes very disengaged and hard to reorient towards anything else. Kerryn, that's been super interesting. Can I ask, have you got any resources that you would highly recommend for leaders who want to learn more? There's many founders who listen to this podcast who in reality have never led a business bigger than the one they're leading today. They haven't grown up as professional CEOs and then started a company. They have grown up with technical skill in a certain area and then started a company, and now they're just kind of making it up as they go. And many of them, as a result of just having to hustle for years and years and years, haven't had the time to do much professional development, don't really know where to turn to level up their leadership. Because, I find that when you're in seven-figure business and it's going well, until the point where you actually need other leaders involved, you can kind of like just get by with your charisma and telling everyone what to do. And then all of a sudden you actually have to flip into a leader who knows how to lead leaders. And that is a different skill set if you've never done it before. Where would you direct them to? Books, resources, tools, courses? Where would you point them if there was a couple of things that you think are really instructive?
Sure. And I love that term, leaders of leaders. I think that and it's almost like you wake up morning and go, oh goodness, I have to step up. I've got to now work at level. I can't be rolling my sleeves up every day. So there's an abundance of information out there on the internet. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I listen to books and I love all those type of things. But TED Talks are extraordinary. There are so many great TED Talks out there. I think that McKinsey, they're curious to me. I believe that they really stepped up their level of focus on leadership through the pandemic. In the past, a lot of their documentation was around process and data, etc. They're probably, obviously they've got a monstrous reach, but their content, so I certainly subscribe to them. I find them really interesting. The work of Patrick Lencioni, that's been around for some time, but his podcast is so accessible. It's called At the Table. It's 30 minutes, and it's real short and sharp and relatively quick, and you can listen to that. I think that the book that I recommend to nearly anyone who's wandering around is actually The Resilience Project. So yes, they have a podcast, but the book, The Resilience Project, which is fundamentally based on the ability to express gratitude, empathy, and mindfulness in all walks of life. And it's an Australian book, and it's so relevant to people because the author is a founder now of the business of the Resilience Project, which is quite significantly in terms of its growth. So you'll learn about what his steps he went through. But they're those human areas that you really need to make sure you're paying attention to. A leader needs to step away from focusing on tasks. They need to focus on how they're inspiring, influencing, and challenging their leaders, not to be going, have you ticked this? Have you ticked that? So we know how to do management 101. Stepping into that next level, those type of areas that I've mentioned, would be really, really useful. Certainly, there's information also out there around dealing with uncertainty. I mean, we've got some blogs on our website and things like that might assist as well. But I actually think that the recency of information that we can get through a TED Talk, through an HBR article, a McKinsey article, or as I say, the At the Table podcast, for example, adds the most value because they're often, they're so relevant to what we're experiencing right here, right now.
Right now. Okay, yeah. And I think, a lot of founders resonate with that because not many of them will take the time out to do a deep course, a really long course. And so something that they can pick up that's super relevant right now, it's based on research they can apply immediately is often really valuable. Thank you so much for that, Kerryn. Look, folks, I really hope you've enjoyed today's conversation with Kerryn. If you're thinking about one of the things I love about this conversation is, we do a lot of work with founders in strategy. We have a course called Scale Up's Roadmap that helps them build out a growth strategy and an execution plan. And the whole point of that is not getting wedded into some 150-page document that takes you forever to build because, as Kerryn's just highlighted, the world just changes way too rapidly. But you also need to ensure that even in periods of uncertainty, you are making some kind of forecast as to how you think you're going to build medium-term competitive advantage. And when I say medium-term, I'm only talking about 3 years. I'm not talking about 12 years or 15 years or 20 years. Like, you still have to be making sure that you're doing important things, not just urgent things. Otherwise, you end up just operating during those environments and then all the things start affecting you because you're not actually carving a path through anything. And so the idea is to make sure that you have a couple of really key focuses, maybe 2 or 3 big initiatives that have come out of robust thinking about strategy. And then you are reflecting on that. And those, if they need to change, then they need to change. But making sure you've got a little bit of clarity first. So if anyone wants to learn more about how we teach founders how to do that, you can go to Scale Up's Roadmap. Just go to the Scale HQ website and click on courses. But before we wrap up, Kerryn, is there anything else that you would like to leave with our audience or any sort of questions you'd like to leave with them or anything that we've missed today that you want to cover?
I guess I would just, as a reminder to people, you've been changing all your life and you're better at it than what you think you are. So realize that. And I guess the other thing I would say is seek clarity over certainty, because you'll get that much sooner, which will give you a sense
Mm.
of peace. So you'll be able to move forward from there.
Oh, I
But
like
I'll
it.
be happy to
Clarity,
chat to
not
anyone
certainty.
about that.
That's awesome. Kerryn, how would people get in touch with you if they want to chat?
So they can contact me directly at Change 2020, Kerryn Fewster on LinkedIn. And also my second company is Adaptic Minds, which is Adapt IQ Minds. And that's
Mhm.
the company that resulted from the research project with QT.
Wow.
So they can reach me that way.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Kerryn. It's been a real joy to chat to you today.
Yeah, thanks. I've really enjoyed it too.
My
Cheers.
pleasure. The team here at Scale HQ hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Now, if you want to achieve scale, but you want to know what's going to hold you back, we can help. Head over to scalehq.com.au/growth score to get your free 9-page growth score report. That's going to help you understand where your top 3 barriers are to scale. And if you'd like, we'll even do a free debrief on the report for you with no obligations or expectations, just lots of value from some CEOs who've scaled to help you on your journey. That's scalehq.com.au/growth score. And find out what's holding you back from fulfilling the potential of your business today.